Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 1024, first, I urge passage of it.
Senator has the floor.
And speaking to it, we have had a couple of incidents involving shootings at religious institutions. We had one involving a Sikh temple, which was more in the nature of sort of assassination, drive-by, or something like that. But I think when we had the shooting that occurred at the African American church in South Carolina, it really sent shockwaves through all churches because it really highlighted the tremendous vulnerability of people when they were attending church services. These folks are uniquely vulnerable, as we all know, because they're lined up in a church pew. Exiting the pew is very difficult, and it makes them sort of the ultimate target of someone who intends to inflict mayhem on the congregation. The defenses really sort of boil down to either you cower in place or you fight back. And I have been kind of amazed. I did not realize this, but churches across this country and across the Commonwealth have implemented procedures to defend themselves. They reacted very much to that shooting in South Carolina. And so I will tell you there are a lot of concealed carry weapons being used excuse me, in churches across the Commonwealth. Basically, under this rule, it repeals what I think is a rather unusual special provision for churches that limits concealed carry, and basically it applies the traditional concealed carry rules to churches just as it would to Walmarts or any other place. It gives the church control over whether firearms are carried or whether they're not. So it's up to the individual church. In any event, I think it is not appropriate to single out churches. There really is no particular reason to do it, and it makes them especially vulnerable. For that reason, I urge you to vote in favor of Senate Bill 1024. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. For what purpose is the senator from Northern Chesapeake, Senator Spruill, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking in opposition to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President and members, I caution you about this bill. The question is that every day that we have a pastor coming here and they pray to us. They pray for God for our safety, to pray to God that we do the right thing. And those of you who believe in the Bible, you believe in it. And Psalm number 46 says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Let me use the black community for an example that whenever there's a problem that we address, that we turn to the church and we call on God. And I'm pretty sure there are those who can, if they choose to, bring a gun. All the shooting that we have had all across the South in the black churches, also in the Jewish synagogue, you never heard one that says they bring a gun in the church because we rely on God. Then, Mr. Chairman, if those of you who have your scripture with you, if you turn to Psalm 123, it says, if it had not been the Lord that was on our side, where would I be? But the first one said, where would Israel be? But where would I be? Because we truly believe that it was God that would give us safety. So we say our safety net in the church is in God. Now, so we are saying but this bill, we are saying that we no longer trust in God because I'm going in that building and carry my gun because God is not the safe person. And we always say in our church that God will make a way somehow. And so I truly believe that in the midst of all the trouble that we've been having through the years, have always had all these killings, what no one has ever said in the church. We want to bring our gun in church. When we start doing that, then we no longer trust in God, then we're going to trust in the guns. If there's one place that God is silent, let him have the church, nothing else. We have foolishly took prayer out of school because some wanted that way because they truly didn't believe in prayer, not because they don't do that, because of votes. They were concerned about not being voted against, so we took prayer out of school. And now we want to say, let's take God out of the church and bring a gun in the church. I'm saying to you, this is not right. How come all the pastors, how come all the priests, how come all religious groups have not flooded this place and said to us, do something about it, put guns in church? Where are they? Only you got those of us who are politicians, we're doing it because of votes. Where are they? They should be up there where you are right now, full, saying, do something about it. Put guns into the church because we're not safe, because God is not our refuge anymore. So do it. And I'm here to tell you this, that of all the trouble that we may have, still God is God. Also it says that God will be with me while I'm alive during the time of death. God is still there. And you would know sometimes when you have a heartache, when things come in your family and crying, you call on God. When someone is about to die, someone is sick, you call on God. You believe him then. You believe that this loved one is sick, and I pray to God to please heal this person because you truly believe that God will make a way somehow. But now they're shooting in the church. So now you can say, bring that gun to church because I'm trusting God for this, but I don't trust in God in my church. If there's any way you can trust God, let it be the church. But the president members, please, let's depend on God on this one. Let God have something. We took prayer away from him. Let's not take God out of our church. Bless your heart.
Thank the senator. For what purpose the senator from Arlington? Senator Favola, rise.
Well, Mr. President, I rise to speak in opposition to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
I think my points will not be quite as eloquent as the points by my colleague and friend. The faith communities in my district, many of them have come and said they really don't want this choice. They really don't want to be faced with the opportunity to either allow guns or not. So as we delved into this, I just want to inform the Senate that Harvard University analyzed the data from the National Crime Victimization Survey and found that people with guns actually only used them in defense of themselves or others 9/10 of the time. But more often, the average person uses a gun because they're scared or they're angry. They want to settle a score. It's not because they were trying to protect a life or defend themselves. And when you're in heated situations, I know many of us are involved in our churches. Some of us are on our church committees and our governing bodies. Surprisingly enough, church politics can be pretty heated, can be pretty divisive sometimes. This is really not a place where you want a gun. I think we should go back to relying on our churches being places of refuge and safety. I ask that you defeat this bill. Thank you.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the senator from Chesterfield? Senator Chase rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in favor of this bill.
Senator has the floor.
I'd just like to remind the body that in South Carolina, just to the south of us, the state Senate mourned one of its own following the mass shooting at an African Methodist Episcopal church in Charleston. Senator Clementa Pinckney, who is a pastor of Emmanuel AME Church, was present during a Bible study when the alleged shooter opened fire, killing the senator and 8 others. The State Legislative Black Caucus issued a statement mourning the loss of a mighty statesman and a man of God who will long be remembered for his integrity and servant nature. Senator Vincent Sheehy, who sat next to Pinckney while in session, eulogized his colleague, the most gentle of all 46 of us in the chamber, the best of all 46 of us in this chamber, is the one who lost his life. Mr. President, sadly, even though the intent of those who attend church is good and we are there to worship, but unfortunately there are those who would do harm to those of us who want to worship. And it is the right of every pastor to make that determination for their own congregation. And for that reason, Mr. President, I would encourage the body to support this bill so that we can continue to worship in peace and protect those that would desire to worship in the church and protect themselves and their members. Unfortunately, we don't live in a society that respects churches anymore, as can be found in a town hall that I had in my church. With that, Mr. President, I simply ask that we pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the senator from Hampton? Senator Locke rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to rise in opposition to Senate Bill 1024
Senator has the floor.
And say that I'm assured that Senator Pinckney, the late pastor of Mother Emanuel AME Church, would be in opposition to this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan, rise?
Speaking to the bill, Mr.
Senator
President.
has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that there is a difference of opinion about whether carrying a gun will keep you safe or not. But I want to reiterate that among the African American churches, not just in my district, but in the districts of Legislative Black Caucus members, which is why we have taken a position against this bill, we are extremely concerned about the proliferation of gun violence, but we have a different reaction in that the church should be where you can go and feel safe and not wonder, is the person sitting next to me carrying a gun? Is the person across from me carrying a gun? And that is why this bill makes many of our religious leaders and congregants very uncomfortable. And I echo what the senator from Hampton has said. The Legislative Black Caucus in South Carolina did not rush to allow or expand who had guns in churches in response to that tragedy. They actually also were concerned about making sure that gun violence is reduced. And there are many who believe that the more guns that there are in a specific location, the more likely one is going to be used. And when one is used, law enforcement has said time and time again, when they come and there's an active shooter situation, regardless of where it is very difficult to determine, are you the original shooter or are you someone trying to stop him? And it makes it very difficult for them to know how to react. And for those reasons, I ask that you vote against the bill.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain, rise?
Mr. President, I rise to speak in favor of the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I'll try and be brief. I've heard long ago that there are many differences between Republicans and Democrats. One of them is that relates to guns. I know that there are a lot of Republicans out there, believe it or not, who don't like guns. You may not believe it, but I'm telling you, there are a lot of Republicans who don't like guns. But the difference is a Republican who doesn't like a gun doesn't buy one. Democrats who don't like guns, they don't want anybody to buy one. You know, we've been talking about choice a lot. And that's all this bill is about choice. And the ability of churches to make their own choices. I may want to go to a church that has a sign on the door that says no firearms allowed. This bill says that church has the right to make its own choice. Before anybody gets too spun up over this, I want you to know what it is that we're doing here. All this bill does is repeals 3 lines from the Virginia Code. And they are probably 3 of the most ineffective lines that are anywhere in the code. What they say is, if any person carry any gun, pistol, bowie knife, dagger, or other dangerous weapon, lawyers in here, listen up, without good and sufficient reason to a place of worship, while a meeting for religious purposes is being held at such place, he shall be guilty of what kind of a felony? Oh, it's a class 4 misdemeanor, okay? Do I have a good and sufficient reason? I'd like to meet the lawyer in this chamber who cannot craft a good and sufficient reason that anybody who may choose to carry a bowie knife or a gun or a pistol into any place couldn't avoid prosecution under this statute. This bill is simply about making sure that our places of worship have the option to adopt the same policies that any of our businesses, any other public place has the ability to adopt. Accordingly, I would ask members of the body to consider strongly voting for choice and voting for this bill.
For what purpose does the senator from Grayson, Senator Carrico, rise?
To speak to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the body, not being a lawyer here, maybe one of the lawyers in here can answer this question, but as you heard the section of this code being read, it says the purpose of the bill would be that we're trying to repeal to a place of worship while a meeting of religious purpose is being held. So many churches in Southwest Virginia, in my district, now because of the cost to heat a church up and to keep the lights on and everything else, on Wednesday nights or prayer meeting nights, someone from their home willingly opens up their home and asks to do the Bible studies and the religious service in their home. And because I really haven't seen a technical definition of a place of worship, would it not then prohibit the individual in the home who actually owns the home, who's having a place of worship, a violation of carrying a gun in his own house? So we're talking about repealing a code where a section of the code where it probably doesn't even define today what most people are doing in the region that I live in. If someone's having a place of worship and someone from Northern Virginia comes to their home, they could make a complaint that they have a gun. just because they don't like guns. So I think the definition is definitely skewed. I think it needs to be repealed. I think there's no definition to this code as to what that place of worship is.
Thank you, Senator. For what purpose does the senator from Fairfax City, Senator Peterson, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Speak to the bill.
Thanks, Senator. You have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I had zero plans to speak on this bill. No, I mean it this time. Let me tell you something. There is a way around any statute in that code book. The simplest law, the most effective law ever written, had 4 words to it. Thou shalt not kill. Okay, now there's a way to excuse or to get around every statement in every code book. The reason why we put words in the code is not just to prosecute people or not prosecute people, it's also to state our values. When we say we don't want guns in places of religious worship, it's not because we want to get people on class 4 misdemeanors, which my colleague has accurately pointed out is basically a slap on the wrist. It's not because we're trying to trap gun owners or prosecute people that are attending Bible studies in Grayson County or other places. It's because we're stating a value. A house of worship is different. It's not the same as a bar. It's not the same as an office. It's not the same as a public place. It's a different place. We are making a statement of values. That's why we have it there. Now, if we don't want that value, if we don't think it's a different place, then go ahead and vote for this bill. If you think it's like any other place, go ahead and vote for this bill. But for me, when I walk into a house of worship, it humbles me because I know that I'm in a place where I need to act and be my best. And that to me means putting down your firearm. Now, that's just me. Maybe that's just my values. But this is a statement of values. It's not about prosecuting people or trying to put people in jail or trap law-abiding gun owners, of which I'm one. It's about making a statement of values. That's all we're doing. So let's make a statement of values, and again, I'm not here to criticize anybody else, but this is not about a crime control bill or trying to prevent traffic. This is about stating our values. Let's state our values. Thank you.
Senator, for what purpose does the senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw, rise?
Speak to the bill, Mr.
Senator has the floor.
Many of these bills that we see on the floor concerning firearms are put there, and I'm constantly told endlessly that the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And that almost never happens. And I'll just give you a couple of instances that I know of, or that have been brought to my attention. This congresswoman from Arizona got shot a few years ago, Gabriel Giffords. There were 2 people in that crowd that had guns, and they told the police they were afraid to use them for fear of hitting innocent people. The other that was brought to my attention was years ago when we had a bill in Senate courts, and I think at the time Senator Stolley from Virginia Beach may have been chair. A fellow got up, I think he was from Loudon, I'm not sure, and he spoke in favor of this one particular bill, and it had been within the last 6 or 7 months out in Los Angeles in the airport. There was a shooting at the Israeli desk, and I think one of the ticket agents, I think, was killed. And he mentioned had he been in there and been able to take a gun into the airport, he could have prevented this. Well, there was a woman sitting in the audience, apparently, that heard the whole story, and she called their embassy, and she said that she kept trying to, without success for a few weeks, to get through to their security director. When she did, at least the story that she told, was that he asked, was this fellow that she was talking about a uniformed policeman? And she told him no. And he told her, and he had a gun, and she said he would have had one. She was told by this individual that we would have instantly killed him and then sent a letter of condolences to his wife. That's what would have happened. They would have seen him with that gun, and they would have instantly killed him. And we've had this bill before us before. I can't ever remember, I mean, there may be one somewhere, but I can't remember a single clergyman coming in saying we need to repeal the existing law. Not a one. And if there's one in Virginia, I'm not aware of it. Not a single one. So I don't see what possible good can come from this bill other than more deaths. And I would hope that we wouldn't send this on to the House. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. What purpose is Senator from Roanoke County? Senator Suderline rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the same sentiment as the senator from Fairfax City, and that I didn't plan to speak to this either. I hold this crazy notion, though, that the law exists to be upheld and that it should be both clear and enforceable. And one of the major influences on that thinking is for years hearing one of the senior statesmen in this building saying that if you want to send a message, go see Western Union. And that's why we don't put things like that in the law just to make statements. We do resolutions for that. And I think the reason that this is such a, it's a bad law. And it's not, if you disagree on the policy, you might think it's a bad law. But when you put something in the code that says you can't do something unless you have a good reason to do it, well, okay. I mean, we can write a whole bunch of bills like that, and we could just go on our merry way. But this bill, the reason that you don't hear as much about it, the current law, is because if you go to churches throughout the Commonwealth, you don't have to go to Grayson County. You can go to churches in Fairfax County. You can go to churches in Alexandria, and there are folks that have firearms there. And you don't see it, but you know, some of them will tell you they carry concealed as they have a right to. And that's something that some of those churches have even encouraged their folks to do. And that's something that makes sense. Was something that I've gotten emails about, and I had a very nice person come visit me yesterday and said, Senator Suderline, you cannot vote for Senate Bill 1024 because it's going to put guns in churches. And I said, I've got news for you. Those firearms are already in churches. So I don't think that this bill is really any shift in policy at all because of the sufficient good reason that's already been discussed. This is really just a cleanup bill. And we've talked about it far too long, and I've also talked about it far too long. So I hope we'll pass the bill.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is the Senator from Prince William, Senator McPike, rise?
Mr. President, rise to speak against the measure.
Senator, has the floor.
I thought my seatmate summed it up quite nicely. Had some fantastic arguments that really hit home on this issue. But listening to some of my colleagues speak today, I have to call up a little bit of memory on this issue. Okay, I submitted a bill in 2017 to deal with this, Senate Bill 1458, which clarified, in fact, struck from the code, good and sufficient reason, provided and then shifted the authority to our pastors, priests, and others, and pastoral councils, that they can determine who can carry within their place of worship, in their place where they're going to pray. But courts committee didn't like it. So evidently they can pick and choose not to clean up language and forget about it here when we're debating it on the floor. Well, there's actually a real opportunity to make that change in the code, clear up the issues that we spent a half hour debating, but that option's not on the table. And therefore, I hope we defeat this measure.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is the senior senator from Chesapeake, Senator Cosgrove, rise?
Speak to the bill, Mr. President.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, we've heard quite a few interesting comments on this bill. It seems to be a fairly straightforward, simple bill that would allow an individual church to make its own valued judgments. We heard about values. Well, you have your values. I have my values. Your church has values. My church has values. Let's not try to impose your values on the values of others when it comes to these places of worship. In addition, we heard about a university that had some incredulous statistics. Let's always remember what Benjamin Disraeli said. There's three types of liars: liars, damn liars, and statistics. I've never heard the ridiculous numbers that I just heard on the Senate floor, but I'm not surprised that it came from a university. We kind of know what's going to come out of there before it happens. And to the senior senator from Fairfax, I would just say the chances are that a clergy member would never say, I'm going to kill a guy with a gun. This should be up to the individual churches, the individual pastors, to make these decisions for their flock. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a difficult decision. Pass this bill.
Thank the Senator. Do any senators other than the patron wish to be heard on Senate Bill 1024? Seeing none, Senator from Loudoun, Senator Black.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had no idea that my little bill would cause such a reaction. But, however, let me just point out a couple of things. First of all, I greatly agree with my colleague from northern Chesapeake that we ought to have prayer in schools. It was a disaster for this nation when we took prayer from schools. It was a tragedy, and it has done enormous damage to this country. So we agree on that point. However, there are a couple of things. One, first, back to those statistics. As far as I know, there is no identifiable group of individuals in the Commonwealth of Virginia who are less likely to misuse a firearm than concealed carry permit holders. And that includes law enforcement officers. I'm talking about the rates are astounding, and I'm not sure exactly why it is. Perhaps it's the feeling that somehow they have been given a certain responsibility and they better darn well abide by it. But concealed carry permit holders are probably the most law-abiding group of people that you can find. But I want to get to what I think is the principal issue that I would like to address, and that is that that somehow having guns present in churches is going to exclude God from those churches. I got to tell you, I've been too many places where men who were armed to defend themselves and to defend their nation went into battle, often knowing that it was very likely that they were not going to survive and they were not going to come back out. And I have no doubt that God was not excluded from their presence. I can remember many times going down from a ridgeline called Nui Lac San, and we would go through one of three lanes that were carved through the landmines at the top of that ridge line, and we would work our way down that steep mountain. We'd always go in the dark of the moon at night so that we couldn't be seen. And then on the east side, when we would take that route, we went through a place, it was a cut in the hill, and I always referred to it as the Valley of the Shadow of Death, because it was a place where we ambushed there. Every single man, every Marine was going to die. There was no getting out. The walls were sheer, and there simply was no way out. And so I would be there staring into the darkness, barely able to make out the vaguest shadow, and shifting the selector on my M16 rifle as I pointed it upward to the top of that cut through the hill, and I always spoke the words of the 23rd Psalm. And I would say, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. I don't accept that God abandons those who are armed. I'm going to tell you, I've stood with groups of armed Marines where a chaplain would pray over the dead or pray before we went into battle. Not necessarily praying for a victory in battle, but praying for the souls of the individuals who were going into battle. So I just feel morally compelled to address that sort of implication that somehow if you are armed, you are not any longer in the presence of God. I don't think that was the intent of the gentleman, but I just want to bring clarity to it. And so I do hope that you will vote for this measure. Thank you.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall Senate Bill 1024 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 21, noes 19.
Ayes 21, noes 19. Senate Bill 1024 passes.